This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Otelia Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. The Prime Ministers of Spain and Norway are in Beijing against a backdrop of trade tensions with Europe and after NATO angered China by calling it a decisive enabler of Russia's war in Ukraine. The Philippine Senate continues its investigation into ex-mayor Alice Guo, who denies accusations that she's Chinese and that she was involved in illegal offshore gaming operations. Typhoon Yagi leaves a trail of destruction in its wake in Vietnam. At least 59 people are reported dead. And authorities say there is more rain, floods, and landslides to come. And in business news, deflation concerns in China gather pace as consumption and investment demand remain sluggish. Ahead on East Asia Tonight, China looking to cash in on Olympic and Paralympic fever and increase awareness of the lesser-known sport of flag football. Leaders of Spain and Norway are in Beijing separately amid simmering trade tensions between China and Europe. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez arrived last night and has met Chinese President Xi Jinping. So has his Norwegian counterpart, Jonas Gahr Støre, who landed in Beijing this morning. Well, CNA's Deborah Wong, she joins us live now from Hong Kong to tell us a little bit more about these high-level diplomatic visits. Deborah, they're taking place at a time of heightened trade tensions. So what exactly is the significance here?
So aside from the political meetings that we're seeing in Beijing, the both leaders will also be visiting other parts of China for business meetings. Now, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez will be visiting Shanghai, and Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre will be heading to Jiangsu for a business event. So observers are saying that the engagements with business communities reflect that both sides still want to expand business and economic cooperation with China. And this comes amid China and European Union trade tensions because, previously the bloc announced that it will be launching provisional duties on Chinese electric vehicles after accusing it of unfair subsidization. And Beijing, in turn, actually launched, an anti-dumping probe into pork products from the European Union. And Spain, given that it is the bloc's largest exporter of pork products, it will be heavily impacted if the tariffs do go through. So that was a matter of high priority, on Sanchez's agenda. His statements say as much. After his meetings this afternoon, he mentioned that Spain wishes to build bridges, defend a fair trade order, and also to keep markets open.
And Deborah, I'm curious to know how exactly is China framing these visits, especially against the backdrop of tensions with NATO?
Okay, so we must also recognize that this year marks 70 years of diplomatic ties between China and Norway. So the visit of the Prime Minister does take on added significance. China's foreign ministry has said in the lead up to the visit that the country is ready to work with Norway to expand political mutual trust, expand practical cooperation, as well as to collaborate on green policies. So that's the message we see that resonates with diplomacy. But it really is unclear how this bilateral cooperation will hold up against NATO's own declaration in July that China is an enabler in the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, China has denied accusations that it's an enabler. In fact, it says that it doesn't support war and also maintains that it wants to promote peaceful dialogue in the Ukraine crisis. And that same week in July, after NATO made the declaration, China and Russia held joint military drills in Guangdong province. And just today, China's defense ministry announced that it will be holding another round of military drills with Russia this month. The drills are seen as a warning to NATO against, provocation. It's also objected to NATO's own push into Asia-Pacific as the bloc is working with APEC countries on cybersecurity as well as defense partnerships. And China does see that as a threat against regional peace, And given that Spain and Norway are members of the US-led NATO, we can expect to see China shore up assurances when it speaks to Norway and Spain during the bilateral meetings to assure them that it is not the threat that NATO makes them out to be.
Yeah, thanks very much for that chat on China-Europe relations. Deborah Wong in Hong Kong. Well, meantime, Singapore's foreign minister says the country's, quote, excellent relations with China are a very bright spot, even as the world is in a less predictable and more volatile state. Vivian Balakrishnan was speaking after meeting his Chinese counterpart, Wang Yi, at the Diaoyutai State Guest House in Beijing. Now, he's on a two-day visit to China, which concludes today. Calling Mr. Wang a dear friend, Dr. Balakrishnan noted that Singapore and China upgraded their bilateral relationship last year, when then Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong visited the country. So this reflects the unique, long-standing and very close ties between the two nations. Singapore and China will mark 35 years of diplomatic ties next year. But Dr. Balakrishnan noted that relations go back much further, with pioneer leaders laying the foundation for a strong and constructive relationship. Dr. Balakrishnan also said that Prime Minister Lawrence Wong is committed to deepening this relationship and that Singapore is looking forward to the visit by Chinese Vice Premier Ding Xuexiang to co-chair the Joint Council for Bilateral Cooperation, or JCBC. Now, this is the highest level annual forum between the two sides.
This will be the 20th JCBC, so it's also a very significant occasion to commemorate, and for us to look for not just the past projects which we've done together, but for new and emerging areas. Because Singapore is a very small, tiny city-state, but we have been privileged to work with China during the different phases of your development.
Calling Dr. Balakrishnan an old friend, Mr. Wang noted how the international landscape is marked by changes and turmoil, and he called on both countries to strengthen coordination and communication as two forces for stability. And he also emphasized China's commitment to deepen reform and continue opening up.
新加坡是最早参与深度融入中国改革开放进程的国家，我们双方始终密切合作，相互借鉴，为各自国家的发展提供了重要的助力。我们愿意同新加坡进一步加强我们的各自发展战略的对接，把我们的新的定位，那就是全方位、高质量、前瞻性的伙伴关系，真正落到实处。那么，同时也为地区的和平稳定和发展继续做出中新两国的新的贡献。
The Philippine Senate has resumed its investigation into dismissed Mayor Alice Guo days after her arrest and deportation from Indonesia. Well, Guo appeared in front of the panel in a bulletproof vest as the Senate extended its probe into her alleged criminal ties. Well, she's accused of fraud, money laundering and human trafficking. Alice Guo became mayor of Bamban town in Talek province back in 2022, but authorities later found that her fingerprints matched those of a Chinese national, Guo Huaping. Well, earlier this year, authorities raided an offshore gambling hub built on land that Guo partially owned. And for more on this hearing, CNA's Buena Banal joins us live now from the Senate in Metro Manila. Buena, so first up, perhaps you can walk us through some of the key findings from today's hearing?
Controversial personality Guo Huaping, with alias Alice Guo, was cited in contempt by the Senate panel for what lawmakers said was her evasiveness and persistent false testimony during that Senate hearing on Monday. Now, of course, as many know, Guo is linked to these crime-ridden Philippine offshore gaming operators, or POGOs, for partly owning through a corporation the land on where one of these POGO hubs were built in the northern Philippine city, or town, I should say, of Bamban, where she previously served as mayor despite her Filipino identity now under question. Authorities unraveled a civil registry mill in southern Philippines where she and over 1,000 others secured birth certificates. And before the lawmakers, during that hearing, Guo insisted that she was born in the Philippines, that she grew up in the Philippines, and that drew the ire of lawmakers, given the documents that the government has that would say otherwise. But still, she insisted that she is a Filipino citizen.
Madam Chair, lumaki po ako, alam ko po ako ay isang Filipino.
Now, the National Bureau of Investigation in the Philippines, however, matched Guo Waping's fingerprints with Alice Guo. Guo Waping, based on government records, entered the Philippines in 2003 as a Chinese national. One question here is how old Guo Waping was when she falsified documents. If her Chinese document is to be believed, she is now 34 years old and was 13 at that time she entered. If the Philippine passport, which authorities now say were falsified, is to be believed, she is now 38 years old, therefore around 17 years old at that time. And if the falsification was done during that year of entry, then this can have implications in criminal culpability, because the Philippines limits criminal culpability for people 15 years old and above based on a statute called the Juvenile Justice and Welfare Act. But of course, she has other charges that supposedly were committed at adult age, including qualified trafficking, money laundering, and tax evasion before the Justice Department, all at the preliminary investigation level. There is also a graft case before a northern Philippine court in Tarlac province, but this is the province where Bamban, where she was previously mayor, is located. So this has surfaced concerns on her influence in the area. Now, she refused to answer many of the lawmakers' questions, citing these pending investigations against her. She also said there is a death threat against her, but refused to elaborate and refused to answer publicly who made this death threat via phone call, she said, citing security concerns.
Madam Chair, wala po din naman po akong plan po na takasan po yung question po. However po, meron lang din po talaga na safety concern po sa sarili ko po, na security concern po, na death threat po na minigay po sa akin. Kaya di ko lang po ma-discuss po sa public po.
Bueno, lots of charges stacked against Alice Guo, but what can we expect to come next in terms of investigation?
Well, after being able to arrest this dismissed Mayor Alice Guo, also known as Guo Waping, based on Chinese records that the Philippines holds, then the challenge, of course, for Philippine investigators and prosecutors is to move those charges forward, a lot of which are still at the preliminary investigation level. The other challenge is to be able to really hold to account whoever masterminded the operations, because according to the Justice Department, Alice Guo is not yet being offered a state witness status, because such a status is offered to a person who has substantive testimony and whose testimony can be corroborated by other witnesses and evidence. And most of all, according to Justice Undersecretary Nicolas Felix T., that this person should be the least or should not be the most guilty of the accused. But despite her not answering many of the lawmakers' questions, her scant disclosures before the Senate panel indicate that she is not the most guilty. That's at least according to her claim.
Clarify ko lang po, Sen, wala po akong pogo at hindi rin po ako nagra-run po ng pogo.
Guo is currently detained at a custodial center within the national headquarters of the Philippine police, where many high-profile suspects are detained pending their cases. The Senate panel investigating the Pogos are also informing the Tarlac court that they have cited her in contempt, but at this point it is unclear if that will even change custody over Alice Guo.
Thanks very much for that report. Long day for you reporting at the hearing. Buena Banal there reporting to us from Metro Manila. Time now for a break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, China says it started an anti-dumping probe into Canada's canola imports weeks before Ottawa's tariffs on Chinese-made EVs take effect. And the takeover bid for Seven & I may not be over. Alimentation Couche-Tard said it remains, quote, highly focused on a deal. Hello there. Good to have your company on East Asia tonight this Monday evening. It is time for your business news with Roland Lim. And Roland, I believe it's another set of downbeat economic data from China?
I'm afraid that is the case. Deflationary fears flaring up in Asia's largest economy. Now, China's inflation rose at a slower than expected pace last month, adding to lingering concerns over weak domestic demand. In particular, core inflation, excluding food and energy costs, cooled to its weakest in more than 3 years. Consumer prices increased 0.6% on year in August, missing estimates but slightly more than in July. Now, core CPI rose just 0.3% on year. That's the lowest since March of 2021. Factory gate prices remained in deflation mode, down 1.8% on year. That's a bigger decline than expected. The data highlights the challenge policymakers are facing to get households to spend as weak demand casts a shadow on the Chinese economy. It has also put in question China's annual growth target of about 5%. Now, consumers have been delaying purchases while businesses are lowering wages. Analysts are expecting more rate cuts and a reduction in the bank reserve requirements to help stimulate the economy. Former central bank Governor Yi Gang has also called on policymakers to focus on fighting deflation. The downbeat data taking on a toll on the Greater China markets. In fact, Chinese stocks are on the brink of falling to 5-year low seen in February as bearish sentiment grips the market. CSI 300 index closing down 1.2%. The blue chip index has fallen more than 13% from its high in May. The broader Shanghai composite slid 0.9%. That's a 8-month low. Meantime, Hong Kong stocks also in the doldrums after Citi joined JP Morgan and Nomura to trim its year-end forecast for the Hang Seng Index to be down by 3% at 19,800. Meantime, shares of China Renaissance, once a leading tech investment bank, plunging to record lows. The company resumed trading in Hong Kong today, 17 months after the detention of its former chairman. Now, trading was suspended in April last year after the company revealed that its chief, Bao Fan, was cooperating in an unspecified investigation by Chinese authorities. Now, shares plummeted 66% at the close. Now, China will start allowing fully foreign-owned hospitals in selected major cities as it steps up efforts to stem a slide in foreign direct investment. Beijing, Shanghai, Nanjing, and Hainan are among major locations identified for the initiative. Now, China ran a similar pilot project back in 2014, under which full foreign ownership was allowed in certain cities. But foreign medical institutions have since been restricted to joint ventures. The latest initiative will allow overseas companies to develop technologies in human stem cell gene diagnosis as well as treatment, but only in the pilot free trade zones in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangdong, and Hainan's free trade ports. The shift comes as China grapples with falling foreign investments amid concerns over its economic slowdown. Now, inbound foreign direct investment fell almost 30% on year to $76 billion between the period of January and July. A business confidence survey conducted by the European Union Chamber of Commerce back in May showed that nearly 40% of respondents felt the slowing Chinese economy was the biggest challenge. And this is up 20 percentage points from last year. Now, China has launched a 1-year anti-dumping investigation into imports of canola from Canada. It's a move widely seen as retaliation against Ottawa's tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles and other products. Now, the investigation will examine imports for all of last year. Now, China's Commerce Ministry says the preliminary evidence and information show that dumping had taken place. The world's biggest oilseed importer, China, bought some 5.5 million metric tons of canola back in 2023, valued at some $3.72 billion. Now, imports from Canada accounted for 94% of that total. China's Commerce Ministry said that the probe should be completed before 9 September next year, but it may be extended for another 6 months. The probe is, quote, fundamentally different, unquote, from measures taken by Canada, a spokesperson from the Commerce Ministry said. Following the lead of the US and EU, Canada is planning on a 100% tariff on imports of Chinese electric vehicles. It also wants to slap a 25% tariff on steel and aluminium imports from China. Mya Group has started taking orders for what's said to be Hong Kong's biggest IPO in more than 3 years. The world's largest consumer appliance maker is offering about 492 million shares at up to $54.80 Hong Kong apiece. That would raise about $3.5 billion US. The Chinese firm expects to price its shares on the 13th of September and make its debut on the 17th. Now, cornerstone investors who keep the shares for at least 6 months have agreed to buy up to $1.26 billion worth. Now, these include a subsidiary of Costco Shipping as well as a unit of UBS Asset Management. Mya's listing is a welcome boost for Hong Kong, where IPO deals have slumped since 2020. Now, Canada's Alimentation Couche-Tard's bid for 7&I Holdings continues even after the Japanese firm rejected its proposal. The Circle K owner, Couche-Tard, said it remains, quote, highly focused on consummating a transaction with 7&I. The merger will create a global convenience store giant with more than 100,000 outlets and represent the biggest foreign takeover of a Chinese firm. Japanese, I should say, not Chinese. 7&I shares rose 2.4% today to close at 2,185 yen. That converts to $15.25 US, above Couche-Tard's initial proposal of $14.86. The operator of 7-Eleven stores rejected Couche-Tard's offer as being too low and fraught with regulatory risk. But it made clear that price was the issue, not the idea of an acquisition. It said it's open to consider any proposal in the best interest of its shareholders. Still, 7&I has appealed to the Japanese government for greater protection, given that its vast businesses include some link to the country's national interests. Now, it's unclear if the Finance Ministry will change the firm's business category to one that could raise the bar for a prospective deal. Staying in Japan, it's revised its second quarter GDP, which showed that the economy expanding at a slightly slower pace than initially thought. Revised annualized GDP came in at 2.9%, below the 3.1% growth in the first reading. It also missed analyst estimates. Now, quarter-on-quarter growth came in at 0.7%. Initial data had assumed that measure to be at 0.8%. The downward revisions were largely due to lower corporate and personal spending. Japan also faces challenges such as weakening external demand from slowing US and Chinese economies. Still, analysts believe the rise in consumer spending supports further rate hikes from the Bank of Japan. Investors are also closely watching the ruling party's leadership election later this month, which will determine who becomes Japan's next prime minister. Japan's equity market taking a beating after that data. Nikkei 225 did recover somewhat, but it is at 0.48% lower. At one point, it did break that 36,000 psychological level, dropping for the first time since August. The Nikkei, the Japanese yen, also is getting weaker against the greenback, 143.60 to the dollar. A quick look at the other Asian markets. South Korea's Kospi closed 1/3% lower, extending losses for a fifth straight session. It had fallen by as much as 2.1%. Heavyweight Samsung Electronics slid to 2% to its lowest since October of 2023. The Taiwan weighted index also slumping nearly 1.4% today. That's even after the island said that exports surged to a record high in August, hitting nearly $44 billion. Investors likely concerned at the height of the AI boom may have passed. And that is the business for now. Uchali, back to you.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Well, we're going to go for another short break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Vietnamese state media say at least 59 people have died in the country after Super Typhoon Yagi ripped through the country's north over the weekend. And the Pope arrives in Timor-Leste, the third stop in his Asia-Pacific tour. The Prime Ministers of Spain and Norway are in China, holding contacts at a time when relations between Europe and Beijing are under pressure from trade tensions. The Spanish Prime Minister has urged dialogue and cooperation between both sides. The Philippine Senate has heard from dismissed Mayor Alice Guo days after her arrest and deportation from Indonesia. She has denied accusations that she is actually Chinese. And Typhoon Yagi causes significant devastation in Vietnam. Authorities have issued severe flood and landslide warnings for some northern regions. At least 59 people are reported dead. A Vietnamese state media says at least 59 people have died after Super Typhoon Yagi ripped through the country's north. While 24 people are still missing and nearly 300 have been injured. And a busy bridge collapsed as heavy rainfall triggered extensive flooding. Now, heavy rain set off landslides with the majority of the deaths reported in mountainous provinces. 6 were killed in the popular tourist town of Sapa after a landslide buried 17 people. Over in Ho Chi Minh province, 4 members of the same family died after a landslide hit them as they slept. Well, the storm has been downgraded to a tropical depression, but its lingering effects continue to threaten a large swathe of the country. Authorities have issued severe flood and landslide warnings for parts of northern Vietnam. Well, CNA's Tong No has more from Hanoi.
Main rivers and reservoirs across northern Vietnam are swelling with rising waters as heavy rains, triggered by the remnants of Super Typhoon Yagi, continue to wreak havoc. In northern Yên Bai province, local communities were forced to evacuate to safe areas from midnight on Sunday. Local authorities have issued urgent warnings as water levels are expected to rise further. Yagi struck Vietnam over the weekend, generating wind speeds of up to 160 kilometers per hour at its center. The eye of the typhoon swept through northern Quảng Ninh and Hải Phòng provinces, home to Vietnam's key seaport and industrial hubs, damaging factories and infrastructure. Yagi also triggered telecom and power outages, though supply has since been partially restored.
Các gia đình không kịp khênh những cái đồ đạc tài sản của mình lên. Hiện nay là tủ lạnh, máy giặt và các cái đồ máy móc xe máy của bọn cô là trong nhà kia đang ngập nước mà nước bây giờ là chưa rút. Đấy. Thiệt hại về tài sản là cũng khá nhiều nhưng bọn cô chưa thống kê được hết.
Phục hồi rồi chắc phải thuận lợi về tầm 1 tháng. Có điện, có nước phải 1 tháng thì mới khắc phục được. Vì là tất cả những cái mái bây giờ nó bay hết, trần sập hết, tất cả mọi cái thiết bị điện rồi đồ dùng trong nhà là hỏng hết, không còn một cái gì cả.
Authorities in Vietnam's capital Hanoi are continuing their efforts to clean up city streets on Monday. Heavy winds uprooted thousands of trees, disrupting traffic and daily routines. Yagi has since weakened in force, but flash floods and landslides remain a threat in northwestern parts of Vietnam on Monday.
In other news, South Korea is hosting an international summit that seeks to explore the use of artificial intelligence in the military, where thousands of representatives from more than 90 countries, including the US and China, have registered to take part in the 2-day conference. The inaugural Responsible AI in the Military Domain Forum was held in the Netherlands last year, with participating nations endorsing a call to action without legal commitment. But host South Korea is hoping to agree on a more detailed blueprint for action this year and to lay out boundaries on the use of AI in the sector. Defense Minister Kim Yong-un described the technology as a double-edged sword in his opening address. He said that while AI can help improve the operational capabilities of a country's military, it can also cause damage from abuse. Well, this year's summit will center on multi-stakeholder discussions on topics including civilian protection and the role of AI in the control of nuclear weapons. South Korea's foreign minister said the talks would also cover a legal review to prevent autonomous weapons from making life and death decisions without appropriate human oversight. But it remains unclear how many nations attending the summit would endorse the document tomorrow. And we have more coverage on regional military developments on our website, cna.asia, and our mobile app, including this commentary on how long South Korea could resist acquiring its own atomic weapons amid the perceived threat from Pyongyang's nuclear program. Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian leader Vladimir Putin have sent greetings to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on the country's founding anniversary. Official media KCNA said that Mr. Xi vowed to strengthen strategic communication and cooperation with North Korea in his message. Well, it marked Mr. Xi's first message to Mr. Kim since January, when he sent a New Year's greeting. Well, this latest message comes as experts say relations between Pyongyang and Beijing have become relatively estranged. China, though, remains the North's longtime ally and largest economic benefactor. North Korea and China are also marking the 75th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic ties today. As for Russia, Mr. Putin said that relations between his country and North Korea have reached a higher level, citing their, quote, constructive summit talks in Pyongyang this June. The ties between the two states have increased in recent years since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Staying with North Korea, Pyongyang has described as fabrication and distortion a UN report that has accused the Kim government of human rights abuses. The report is due to be submitted to the United Nations General Assembly. But North Korea's Vice Foreign Minister Kim Sun-yong has already reacted to the findings, saying these were a bid by their enemies to tarnish the country's image. The report mainly focused on the widespread use of forced labor that many North Korean citizens have to perform. The report says laborers work in poor conditions and are subject to harsh treatment. According to the United Nations, there have been reports of beatings, starvation, and wage theft. The UN Human Rights Office in Seoul described the abuse as deeply institutionalized and a serious human rights concern. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has recommended that North Korean officials investigate and prosecute those accused of having committed human rights violations. China says that relations with the Philippines is at the crossroads, a result of heightened tensions in the South China Sea. Well, this remark was part of a commentary published by the state-run newspaper People's Daily on Monday. Well, it says the right path would be to pursue dialogue and consultation, while stressing for Manila to seriously consider the future of bilateral relations and work with Beijing to bring their ties back on track. Tensions have been running high between Beijing and Manila over the South China Sea in the past few months. Both countries accused each other of intentionally ramming Coast Guard vessels in disputed waterways. The latest encounter occurred just 2 weeks ago at the Sabina Shoal, triggering a cascade of blame and accusations. Philippine officials accused Chinese ships to have rammed its vessels thrice, while Beijing defended its move, saying that it was Manila's Coast Guard ships behind the incident. Beijing claims almost the entire South China Sea, an assertion that the Permanent Court of Arbitration said back in 2016 that it had no legal basis. And now we turn to Timor-Leste in Southeast Asia, where Pope Francis is on the third stop of his Asia-Pacific tour. Now, he called on the country's leaders to prevent every kind of abuse of young people. Pope Francis made those remarks in a speech to the various officials and diplomats gathered at the presidential palace in capital Dili. The pontiff attended a welcome ceremony at the palace, where he witnessed the march past of the honor guards and greeted children in traditional attire. Pope Francis was next to President José Ramos Horta as he met with government authorities, members of civil society, and the diplomatic corps. Pope Francis later signed the palace guest book before he sat down with the president. Pope Francis is the first pontiff to visit Timor-Leste since it gained independence in 2002. And the highlight of his visit is a colossal mass due to take place tomorrow in the capital, Dili. An estimated 750,000 people are expected to attend. Pope Francis is widely expected to touch on economic and social issues during his visit. Timor-Leste is one of the world's poorest countries, with about 42% of its population living below the poverty line. Despite that, the government rolled out the red carpet for the pontiff, setting aside $12 million for his visit. And we will have more updates on Pope Francis later on Asia Tonight at 8 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time with CNA's Leong Wai Kit. Well, we're going to go for another short break now, but coming up on East Asia Tonight, the little-known sport of flag football, set to make its Olympic debut in 2028. But China is getting a head start in training youth to make a splash in Los Angeles. From unexpected wins to dramatic upsets, it's been a summer of thrills and spills for Chinese athletes and sports fans. Well, the country leaves Paris with its best Olympic gold medal showing since 2008 and dominates the Paralympics as well with over 90 gold medals. And as CNA's Lauren Ong finds out, even though the Summer Games fever has not yet fully subsided, the country is already looking ahead to Los Angeles 2028.
It's been a 5-year journey of sweat and tears for 11-year-old Feng Bailing, learning the plays and the playbook of flag football.
我特别希望在奥运会的时候参加橄榄球的比赛，因为我觉得这是一个特别自豪的事情。每拿一个阵，我就会觉得自己成长了一步。
A relatively unfamiliar sport in China, flag football is one of 2 sports that will debut at the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles. The game is most widely played in the United States. Squash will also feature for the first time, with baseball, lacrosse, and cricket making a return.
While flag football might be newer to some, the sport's debut at the next Olympic Games might feature veterans on the field. Hosts the United States already have a well-established ecosystem for American football, which is a more contact-heavy variant of this sport. And stars of their National Football League have already expressed interest to compete.
This includes well-known quarterbacks as the league pushes to make flag football a global game. According to American football officials, an estimated 20 million people in more than 100 countries are currently playing the sport. Like these students in Beijing, who have picked up the sport partly in anticipation of its growing prominence.
在中国，你是奥运会项目和非奥运会项目 所得到的关注差别非常大，中国的一些体育管理的部门就会很重视，然后呢，各个城市有机会就会去组建代表队，去进行一些，就是政府会提供一些资金的支持，那么这样呢，就会给到从事这项运动的青少年呢，他就有一个就是梦想的舞台吧，他有个出口，他可以比如说有机会成为国家队的一员，有机会去代表国家 去参加奥运会，那么这个就会对很多人产生很强的吸引力。
In recent years, flag football has become more popular in China, mainly as a type of leisure sport among young people in the city. But the Olympic inclusion means the non-contact, fast-paced team sport will soon become more competitive.
因为橄榄球是一项和其他很多运动是相通的。我们其他一些项目的运动员，他通过在之前身体素质的锻炼，然后他通过几年的训练，他依然可以在腰旗橄榄球在奥林匹克的赛场上面会有非常好的表现。所以这对他们来说并不是一件很难的事情。我知道在中国的各个城市已经组建了腰旗橄榄球队，我相信在不久的将来，你应该就可以听到国家腰旗橄榄球队的消息了。
China tied with the US for most gold at the Paris Olympics, the first time the 2 countries have done so at the Summer Games. China finished second on the total medal count with 40 gold, 27 silver, and 24 bronze. Many in the country are hopeful that new additions such as flag football will add to China's future medal haul.
在美国呢，认为这个是一个自己的强势项目，所以才会申请加入这个奥运会的这个新增项目里面。然后，其实对于中国人来说，我觉得，这项运动只要我们了解它、理解它，然后我觉得肯定能玩得好。因为，这项运动不光是要靠身体的这个对抗的能力，还要靠一些组织、一些团队的这个协作。
新增加的项目，你比如说那个就是什么霹雳舞啊、小轮车，还有那个我们也都能拿奖牌的。然后我觉得不论任何项目，只要是我们中国人 以现在这种条件啊，我们来学习、来参与，我们肯定以后会取得很好的成绩的。像橄榄球，肯定也会。
But doing well in sports produces more than just feel-good patriotic sentiments. It also makes economic sense. Under China's 14th five-year plan, there are aims to grow the sports industry to almost $700 billion by 2025, from less than $200 billion in 2014.
1, 2, 3. And for more, let's have a chat with Ines Liu, Senior Manager with International Business Advisory at Desan Shira and Associates. Well, welcome to East Asia tonight, Ines. So first, I want to pick up from the statistics that we saw from Lauren's story. $700 billion. That's how vast China's sports market is valued. And I'm wondering, Ines, how is that going to impact the growth and the development of new sports like flag football in the country?
Oh, thanks for having me. So the sports industry in China has been great growth in the past few years and is expected to continue growing in the years to come. The social needs we have seen of young people, favorable, government policies, increasing like health consciousness, also among like different groups. So definitely, I think the mass public interest in the sports industry is a reality. Also with added bonus of improving like overall health. So again, I think raising health awareness and also like I think the outdoor sports provide like both like social interactions and also like fitness opportunities for younger generations, also creating like a popular trend, especially I think among the Gen Z generations.
Yeah, so would you say that the Gen Z basically they're fueling a sports revolution at home, because we're seeing China doing very well in the new sports. We're talking about breakdancing, skateboarding, and maybe even flag football in 2028.
Yeah, so I do find, I think like China is becoming a country, I think it's great that sports is a significant part of their life. So the reasons like people get stuck into a workout for, it's for like a physical health or fitness or like a athletic performance. And secondly, I think for fun and enjoyment. So I think several sectors behind like our demand for the like a China outdoor sports industry. So becoming like a active lifestyle functional requirement of like athleisure sports.
Yeah, so you've talked about how it's part of trying to encourage active lifestyle and keeping healthy. But can you just tell us a little bit more about the role that the government, in terms of support, in terms of funding, how big a role does that play in China's pursuit of success in Olympics?
So I think like government, like there's a lot of like initiatives that I think is we mentioned about like the 5-year plan, and also lots of like facilities. They also through like a celebrity endorsement to sponsor like the different like the sports. I think like overall they have promoting like a healthier lifestyle. And also environmental consciousness also play like a very important role in boosting China's sports market.
Yeah, and you've mentioned about these sports stars, these influencers. Just to name a few, you've got tennis player Zheng Qinwen, you've got the skier Gu Ailing. How do you think they're influencing consumer spending within China itself?
I think like a brand awareness and because. So normally I think they have like the outdoor sports that can categorize like the services and also the like the products. So like I think for sports themselves, they will lead them to participate the sports. And also I think I think they have accessories, all the different the products, items in the market. And also their professionalism. The attitude also to like when they doing the athletes activities.
Ines, I'm curious to know as well, with China's Olympic and Paralympic success, have you seen that it has led to a shift in the priorities among the parents? So what I'm trying to ask is that there is more emphasis on sports over traditional, pursuits like music and culture. Do you see that?
I think that's kind of like the trend, like for Chinese parents, they would like to help their children to find a way to have more opportunities like to for their life choice, but a balance I think for other choices as well.
Sure. Now, I just want to find out more about China's ambitions in terms of building its domestic sports industry with global brands, because there are some local sports brands that are leading the charge, right?
Yeah, so I think like the China reason, so like some Chinese brands like their local brands. So I think we call like some like a national chic. I'm not sure it's like the correct translation. So they also compete with also the foreign brand to fit in this market.
Yeah, could you elaborate a little bit more about that? You said national chic. So is there a sense that it's a lot cooler to be wearing a local brand as to say like, to a Western brand, for instance?
I think it also depends on, I think like, like how much cost that you want to bear. But also we also do find, I think some like the Chinese brand, they also kind of prioritize like functionalities. Like for example, also like waterproofings, lightweight designs, also like maybe like quick drying capabilities. So they also will be able to achieve, I think, the customer comfort during the rigorous activities. So that I think they can be also like the functions they can compete with like a different brand. So I think for foreign business, like adding and like extra layer of like appeal and is setting them apart in terms of like both quality and also some like intricate detailings.
All right.
That's I think it's like both I think the brands like foreign and also like Chinese brands, we both can find in this market.
Sure. Well, thanks so very much for speaking to us on East Asia Tonight, Inez Liu from Desan Shura and Associates. And before we go, we turn to Canada, where scores of Korean Wave or Hallyu fans waited for hours outside this year's Toronto International Film Festival for a glimpse of their favorite stars. And you might have heard of them. Actors Lee Dong-wook, known for his performance in the K-drama Guardian, the Lonely and Great God, and Yoon Bin, who starred in Crash Landing on You. Well, both appeared on the red carpet on Sunday for a premiere of their historical drama, Harbin.
First time, yeah.
How do you find the crowd so crazy?
Yeah, so exciting and 너무 고맙고 반갑고. Yeah.
받는 것 같아서 너무 기분이 좋고 또 이렇게 훌륭한 영화제에 또 이렇게 팬들과 함께 할 수 있어서 너무 기분이 좋은 것 같습니다.
In case if you're wondering, Harbin is a historical spy thriller revolving around a group of Korean activists who fought against colonial Japan in the early 20th century and is behind the assassination of the country's first prime minister, Ito Hirobumi. Well, it's one of the many Korean productions featured at the film festival, which is one of the most prestigious film festivals in North America. Well, this year's TIFF is a 49th edition and will be held until Sunday. And that wraps up Monday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at, you've guessed it right, CNA.Asia. And you can also, of course, find us on Facebook, YouTube, and on X. Well, thanks for watching.